The Haloria space station hung like a crystalline ornament in the void, its translucent spires catching the light of distant stars. Positioned as the central hub of the Five-Star Alliance, Haloria had earned its reputation as a nexus for cultural connectivity, a place where alien species and humans came together to foster peace and understanding. Jason Carter stood at the viewport of his newly assigned quarters, gazing at the bioluminescent gardens that lined the exterior of the station. Their soft blue glow pulsed in gentle waves, almost like a heartbeat. As an environmental engineer from Earth, Jason had been sent to Haloria to oversee the implementation of a new artificial environmental system, a responsibility he took seriously. His previous posting at Mars Haven had prepared him for the technical challenges, but nothing could have readied him for the cultural intricacies of Haloria. Environmental systems functioning at 96% efficiency, announced the station's AI. Adaptation to Alori biological patterns in progress. Thank you, Jason replied. Turning from the viewport, he ran a hand through his dark hair, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. The Alori, the dominant species on Haloria, had specific environmental requirements. Their bodies resonated with certain pheromonal frequencies that needed to be accommodated in the station's air filtration system. On his desk lay a series of briefings about Alori culture. He had skimmed them during his journey, but one aspect had caught his attention. The Alori had strict laws regarding sexual relations, something called the biolink rite, a sacred reproductive ceremony that prohibited pulling out during intercourse until the ritual was complete. Non-Alori participants, humans, Requans, Trivans, and others, were required to comply with this law if they engaged in any rituals with the Alori. Violation was considered a cultural offense punishable by isolation appeal, deportation to Earth, or a separate detention facility. Jason had dismissed this information as irrelevant to his engineering duties. After all, he wasn't here for cultural exchange or intimate relationships. He was here to ensure environmental systems functioned properly. Little did he know how quickly his professional boundaries would blur. 3 days into his assignment, Jason found himself redirected to the Alori Royal Palace to calibrate the biological climate system. The palace stood at the pinnacle of a crystal tower, its living architecture incorporating luminous crystals and pulsating membranes. As he worked on the central console, he became aware of a presence behind him. "You adjust our life patterns with such precision," came a melodious voice. "Yet your own heart beats with uncertainty." Jason turned to find himself face to face with Princess Yalara of the Alori. Her luminescent skin gave off a soft violet glow, and her eyes, large, almond-shaped, and iridescent, studied him with undisguised curiosity. The royal markings on her forehead indicated her status as the sole heir to the luminous dynasty. "Your Highness," Jason bowed awkwardly, unsure of the proper protocol. "I'm just doing my job." "The pheromone balance feels harmonious," she said, stepping closer. "Different from what the previous engineers achieved? You understand resonance." Jason felt a strange flutter in his chest. Environmental engineering is about balance, finding the sweet spot where different elements work together. Just like our cultures. Yalara smiled, revealing slightly pointed teeth. "I find human biology fascinating. Your species adapts through technology rather than biological evolution. Ingenious, if inefficient." Despite his professional demeanor, Jason found himself drawn to Yalara's regal pride and ethereal beauty. Their conversation drifted from technical specifications to cultural differences, and Jason surprised himself with his openness. Usually reserved and analytical, he found himself sharing stories of Earth and his childhood in the new Pacific arcology. "Would you tell me more about human mating rituals?" Yalara asked suddenly, causing Jason to nearly drop his calibration tool. "That's not really my area of expertise," he stammered. "A pity," she replied, her skin momentarily shifting to a deeper violet, and a Lori expression of amusement. Perhaps another time. As days passed, Jason found himself assigned more frequently to the palace. Each time, Yalara would appear, ostensibly to monitor his work. But their conversations grew increasingly personal. Jason learned that Yalara had been raised with the burden of royal expectation, trained from birth to uphold rituals and maintain the purity of her lineage. In turn, he shared his passion for creating sustainable environments and his dreams of someday designing a self-sufficient colony on Titan. 2 weeks into his assignment, Heloria erupted in celebration. The Intercultural Festival, an annual event celebrating the diversity of the Five-Star Alliance, transformed the station into a kaleidoscope of colors, sounds, and scents. Species from across the Alliance gathered to share their customs, arts, and ceremonial practices. During the third night of festivities, as Jason observed a Requan light dance from the edge of a gathering, a palace attendant approached him. "Engineer Carter," the attendant bowed. "Her Royal Highness Princess Yalara requests your presence at the inner sanctum for a biolink preview." Jason hesitated. "A what?" "A preliminary dating ritual to test compatibility between species," the attendant explained, expression neutral. "It is considered a great honor." Curiosity overrode caution, and Jason found himself following the attendant through the labyrinthine corridors of the palace. They arrived at a chamber bathed in soft, pulsating light. Crystalline formations jutted from the walls and ceiling, their luminescence shifting between blues and purples. In the center stood Yalara, dressed in ceremonial attire that accentuated her natural glow. "Jason," she greeted him, her voice carrying a new resonance that seemed to vibrate through his chest. "I'm pleased you accepted my invitation." "I was intrigued," he admitted, "though I'm not sure I understand what this entails." Yalara approached, her movements fluid and graceful. The BioLink preview is an ancient tradition, a way for potential partners to assess their biological harmony before committing to the full BioLink rite. It involves synchronized breathing, pheromone exchange, and, if compatible, a preliminary physical connection. Jason felt his heart rate accelerate. "Physical connection?" "Nothing so permanent as the full rite," she assured him. "Think of it as a test of resonance. Humans would call it a date, perhaps, though more intimate." What followed was unlike anything Jason had experienced. Guided by Yalara, they engaged in a ritual that began with synchronized breathing exercises. As they inhaled and exhaled in unison, Jason felt a strange warmth spreading through his body. The air seemed to thicken with pheromones, and the crystals around them pulsed in time with their heartbeats. "Your rhythm adapts well," Yalara whispered, her fingers tracing patterns on his forearm. Where she touched, his skin tingled pleasantly. "Now we move to pheromone attunement." She produced a small vial containing a luminescent liquid, dabbing it on her wrists and throat. She invited Jason to do the same. The substance smelled of something indefinable, not quite floral, not quite spice, but undeniably alluring. "This enhances our natural pheromones," she explained. "It helps bridge the biological gap between our species." As the ritual progressed, Jason found himself drawn into an increasingly intimate dance. Their bodies moved in harmony, guided by the pulsing light and the subtle influence of the pheromones. The scientific part of his mind recognized that he should be maintaining professional distance. But something more primal responded to Yalara's presence. When their lips finally met, it felt like an electric current passed between them. The kiss deepened, and Jason felt himself surrendering to sensations he had never experienced, as if their nervous systems were temporarily merging. "You respond so beautifully," Yalara murmured against his lips. "We are approaching the excitement peak phase." Lost in the moment, Jason followed her lead as they moved to a raised platform in the center of the chamber. There, amid the pulsing crystals, their embrace grew more passionate. Clothing was shed, and Jason marveled at the bioluminescent patterns that adorned Yalara's body, living art that shifted and flowed with her emotions. Their bodies joined in a dance as old as time, yet utterly new in its expression. Jason, operating on instinct and his understanding of human intimacy, felt a crescendo approaching. At the peak of excitement, when Yalara whispered words in her native tongue that his translator couldn't process, he did what came naturally to him as a human. He withdrew. The reaction was immediate and shocking. Yalara froze, her luminescence flaring to a bright, alarmed magenta. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Wait, human, you weren't supposed to pull out. It's illegal here," she exclaimed, her voice a mixture of shock and dismay. The warmth of the moment evaporated instantly. The pulsing crystals shifted to a harsh, discordant red. An alarm sounded, a low, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through the very walls. "What?" Jason stammered, confused and alarmed. "What did I do wrong?" "The BioLink preview requires completion without withdrawal," Yalara explained, hastily covering herself. "It's the fundamental principle of the rite, the uninterrupted flow of life energy. By pulling away, you violated the binding connection law." Before Jason could process this information, the chamber doors slid open. Guards in ceremonial armor entered, their expressions severe. Behind them came several robed figures, members of the Elori Bioconclave, the religious authority that governed all reproductive rituals. "Engineer Jason Carter," one of the robed figures announced. "You are detained for cultural violation. Princess Yalara, your presence is required at the pheromone cleansing chamber immediately." As Jason was led away, he caught a glimpse of Yalara's face. Her luminescence dimmed with what he recognized as shame and confusion. In that moment, he realized that his ignorance had not only placed him in jeopardy, but had compromised her standing within the royal family. Jason found himself confined to a Spartan chamber, deep within the palace. The cultural containment room, as his guards called it, was designed to minimize pheromonal interaction, its walls coated with a dampening material that gave off a faint, purple glow. The air felt thin, lacking the rich oxygen content he had grown accustomed to on the station. For hours, he sat alone, replaying the events in his mind and berating himself for his carelessness. He had read about the BioLink rite, but had dismissed it as irrelevant to his work. Now, his cultural ignorance might cost him his position, or worse. When the door finally opened, two figures entered, a severe-looking member of the Bioconclave and a human woman Jason recognized as Dr. Marina Shu, the Earth diplomatic liaison to Haloria. "Engineer Carter," Dr. Shu began, her expression professionally neutral. "You've created quite a situation." "I didn't understand," Jason said desperately. "It was a misunderstanding." The Elori priest, a tall figure with elaborately patterned luminescence, spoke in a resonant voice. "Ignorance of sacred law does not excuse its violation. The BioLink rite, even in its preview form, is our most sacred connection. Every interaction within the ritual, whether for excitement or reproduction, must be completed to its final stage. Withdrawal is considered an offense to the sacred life essence." Jason attempted to explain Earth customs, but quickly realized he was out of his depth. The Elori biological language included concepts entirely foreign to him. Pheromone stimulation, synchronized heartbeats, sperm frequency adjusted to Elori radiation. The more he tried to explain, the more apparent the cultural chasm became. "What happens now?" he asked finally. "The Bioconclave will decide your fate," the priest answered. "Until then, you remain in containment. Princess Yalara faces her own challenges. Her royal kin question how a princess of the blood allowed an outsider to disrupt the ritual." After they left, Jason paced the small chamber, anxiety building. Through the thin walls, he could hear whispers, palace attendants discussing his transgression. A human defiling the biolink. Unthinkable. Poor Princess Yalara. Her inheritance could be jeopardized. They say her brother might claim precedence now. The implications grew clearer. His actions had not only violated a cultural taboo, but had potentially disrupted the royal succession. Yalara, as the crown princess, was expected to uphold the rituals with perfect adherence. His mistake had cast doubt on her judgment and fitness to rule. Meanwhile, Yalara underwent the humiliating process of pheromone resynchronization, a spiritual cleansing ritual where participants placed purified pheromones on each other's bodies under sacred lens light. She performed this act to demonstrate her continued faith in the traditions and her hope that Jason would be spared severe punishment. As she endured the ritual, family members criticized her openly. How could a royal princess allow an outsider to mock our ceremony? Your judgment is compromised by fascination with the alien. Perhaps your brother would better preserve our traditions. Internally, Yalara was torn between her royal duty, adhering to ritual, family pressure, and her growing feelings for Jason. Something about his different perspective had awakened questions she had long suppressed about the rigid traditions that governed her life. The following day, Jason found himself transferred to a shared detention area with an Allori scholar priest named Turhan. Elderly by Allori standards, Turhan's luminescence had faded to a gentle amber, and his eyes held a wisdom that transcended cultural boundaries. You have caused quite a disturbance, human, Turhan said, his voice softer than the harsh tones of the bioconclave members. I never meant to offend, Jason replied. On Earth, what I did is normal. Turhan nodded slowly. Many species, many ways. The Allori believed that life energy must flow uninterrupted during sacred communion. To withdraw is to reject the spiritual connection. To say the other is unworthy of complete unity. I didn't know, Jason insisted. No one explained the rules clearly. Perhaps that was an oversight, Turhan acknowledged. But now, you face the Bioredemption Protocol, a series of biological and spiritual trials to reintegrate with Allori ritual. If you fail, the punishment is isolation, permanent expulsion from Haloria. Over the next several hours, Turhan secretly guided Jason through basic concepts of Allori biology and spirituality. The elderly scholar seemed to sympathize with Jason's plight and provided insights that would help him navigate the coming trials. You must learn to balance your pheromone signature, Turhan instructed, showing Jason how to control his breathing to regulate his body's chemical outputs. When questioned by the conclave, demonstrate this technique. It shows respect for our ways. As Jason practiced these unfamiliar techniques, Yalara faced her own trial. The conservative faction of the royal family, led by her uncle, Duke Raylor, pressed for her disinheritance. They argued that her involvement with a human demonstrated poor judgment, unbecoming of a future ruler. Two distinct factions emerged within the Allori royal court. The Compassion faction believed that the love between Yalara and Jason could foster better intercultural relations and should be used as a symbol of peace. The Tradition faction considered Jason's behavior a national offense, called for severe punishment, and suggested using Yalara as a divine sacrifice to restore honor. On the third day of his detention, Jason was informed that he would undergo the life sync test, a trial to determine if he could maintain a heart rhythm compatible with Allori frequency signals. As he was prepared for the test, a palace attendant slipped him a small package. Inside was a delicate strand of luminescent material. A note accompanied it. This pheromone thread is an ancient Allori artifact. It will stabilize your biological frequency. Courage, Jason. Why? The gesture touched him deeply. Despite the shame and pressure Yalara faced, she had risked further censure to help him. In that moment, Jason resolved to overcome every challenge, not just for his own sake, but for hers as well. The life-sync chamber was a sterile environment with minimal oxygen, designed to enhance pheromone effects. At its center stood the life-link conduit, a gap between two biological systems. Jason would need to place his hand into this gap and maintain a stable heart rate, while his body was bombarded with Olori biological signals. Members of the Bioconclave and royal family gathered to witness the test. Among them, Jason spotted Yalara. Her luminescence dimmed in what he now recognized as anxiety. Duke Rayler stood beside her, his expression openly hostile. "Begin the sync," announced the presiding priest. Jason stepped forward, extending his hand toward the conduit. As his fingers breached the gap, he felt an immediate response, a tingling sensation that rapidly intensified to near pain. His heart rate spiked, and the monitoring crystals flashed warning signals. "Unstable," murmured the observers. "The human cannot maintain harmony," fighting against the discomfort. Jason recalled Turhan's teachings. He regulated his breathing, focusing on creating a steady rhythm. When this proved insufficient, he reached into his pocket and withdrew the pheromone thread. With his free hand, he placed it against his wrist, allowing its influence to help stabilize his body's responses. Gradually, the painful sensation subsided. The monitoring crystals shifted from alarming red to a cautious yellow. Not perfect harmony, but not failure either. "Acceptable tolerance," announced the priest finally. "The human may proceed to the next phase of redemption." As Jason was led from the chamber, he caught Yalara's eye. Despite the distance between them, he felt a connection, a shared determination to overcome the obstacles before them. That night, a guard delivered a message to Jason's cell, written in elegant script on bioluminescent paper. It glowed softly in the darkness. "The Life Bond night approaches. They have agreed to let you attempt the full biounity rite as redemption. If we succeed, all charges will be dismissed, and you will be accepted as my unity partner. If we fail..." The message trailed off, the implications clear. Jason spent the night in contemplation. What had begun as a simple engineering assignment had evolved into something far more complex. He found himself not only fighting for his freedom, but also for a relationship he hadn't anticipated, one that crossed species, cultures, and traditions. The following day, Turhan visited again, bringing ceremonial garments and detailed instructions. "The biounity rite is complex," the elderly scholar explained. "You will face 4 stages: destiny vow, pheromone exchange, life rhythm connection, and transcendence. The final stage requires physical union until the culmination point to complete the ritual." "And if I fail?" Jason asked. Turhan's luminescence dimmed. "Then both you and Princess Yalara will face consequences. You will be exiled, and she may lose her right to succession. The royal line has not been broken for 7 generations." As the day of the ceremony approached, tensions within the palace escalated. Duke Rayler made no secret of his opposition, gathering supporters to protest the unprecedented union between a human and an Olori royal. "This mockery of our sacred traditions cannot stand," he declared in council. "The princess has been corrupted by alien influence." The Life Bond night arrived with all the pageantry Olori tradition demanded. The entire population of Haloria was invited to witness the ceremony from viewing platforms throughout the station. The sacred biounity altar stood prepared in the Grand Palace Hall, surrounded by cascading crystals that would amplify and reflect the participants' biological signals. Jason was escorted to a preparation chamber, where Turhan waited with final instructions. "Remember what I taught you," the scholar said quietly. "The key is synchronization, not dominance, not submission, but harmony. When in doubt, follow Yalara's lead." Dressed in ceremonial robes embedded with responsive crystals, Jason was led to the entrance of the Grand Hall. There, he found Yalara waiting. her attire even more elaborate, layers of translucent material that captured and enhanced her natural luminescence. "Are you prepared?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "As much as I can be," he replied honestly. "Yalara, I'm sorry for all the trouble I've caused you." Her luminescence pulsed once, a gesture he now recognized as affection. "You have given me something valuable, Jason, the courage to question traditions that have gone unexamined for too long." Together, they entered the hall. Thousands of eyes watched from both within the chamber and via transmission throughout the station. The bioconclave waited at the altar, their robes shimmering with ritual significance. "Approach," intoned the Chief Lord, his voice resonating through the hall. Jason and Yalara ascended to the altar, where they stood facing each other. The ceremony began with the destiny vow, an exchange of promises, spoken in ancient Alori. Yalara spoke fluidly, while Jason, coached by Turhan, carefully repeated the unfamiliar syllables. Next came the pheromone exchange, a dance-like movement where they circled each other, their bodies releasing carefully prepared chemical signals enhanced by the ceremonial garments. Jason felt lightheaded as the pheromones took effect, creating a heightened awareness of Yalara's presence. The third stage, life-rhythm connection, proved more challenging. Crystal bands were placed around their wrists, connecting them to the central altar. Through these bands, their heartbeats were made visible as pulses of light that traveled between them. The goal was perfect synchronization, a shared rhythm that would signify their biological compatibility. Jason struggled to match Yalara's natural cadence. His human heart, evolved under Earth's conditions, resisted the alien pattern. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he concentrated, applying the techniques Turhan had taught him. In the audience, Duke Rayler watched with thinly veiled satisfaction. "The human fails," he murmured to his supporters. "As expected." But Jason persevered. Using the pheromone thread concealed in his ceremonial bracelet, he gradually brought his heartbeat into alignment with Yalara's. The light pulses between them stabilized, merging into a unified stream. "The rhythms align," announced the presiding priest, surprise evident in his voice. "Proceed to transcendence." The final stage began. The altar transformed, creating a private space surrounded by a veil of light. Within this sacred enclosure, Jason and Yalara would complete their union, the physical joining that would seal their bio-unity. As they embraced, Jason felt a profound connection forming between them, deeper than physical attraction, more complex than emotional bond. Their bodies glowed with shared bioluminescence, creating patterns that neither could produce alone. But as the ritual progressed, Jason encountered an unexpected challenge. The ceremonial chamber contained reduced oxygen to enhance pheromone effects, and he began to feel lightheaded. His heart rate slowed dangerously. Yalara noticed immediately. "Jason," she whispered, alarm evident in her voice. "Your life signs are weakening." The critical moment approached, the culmination that would complete the ritual. But Jason's strength was failing. In desperation, Yalara considered breaking the connection to save him, knowing that such an action would violate the very law they sought to honor. At that moment, the Chief Lord's voice penetrated the light veil. "If you cannot withstand the trial, withdraw. But know that withdrawal will cause the ritual to fail, violating the prohibition law once again." Jason and Yalara locked eyes. In that moment of crisis, instead of surrendering to the seemingly inevitable failure, Yalara grasped Jason's hands firmly. She channeled all her willpower into maintaining his faltering heart rhythm while balancing her own. Jason, using his last reserves of strength, intensified his pheromone response with a desperate shudder. Just as it seemed they would fail, their heartbeats synchronized perfectly. A golden rose light flooded the sacred altar, bathing them in its warm glow. "The rite is complete," announced the Chief Lord, disbelief evident in his voice. Together, Jason and Yalara had reached the synchronized culmination point. They embraced, their bodies emanating a biological aura that spread throughout the chamber. A chant rose from the gathering. No species, no body, only love. The aftermath was immediate and transformative. The conservative faction of the royal family fell silent, unable to deny the sacred nature of the successful biounity. Even Duke Rayler stood speechless, his opposition undermined by what many were already calling a miracle. The Chief Lord, moved by the unprecedented union, proclaimed Jason a unity partner, a special title that allowed him to serve as a bridge between humans and Allori. Yalara's royal standing was not only preserved, but enhanced by her role in this historic union. In the days that followed, Jason was permitted to remain on Haloria under the Symbiotic Accord, a treaty that established him as a cultural ambassador between Earth and Haloria. Yalara publicly acknowledged her love for Jason, inspiring many Allori families to reconsider their rigid attitudes toward outsiders. News of the biounity miracle spread throughout the Five-Star Alliance, opening pathways for cultural exchange and cross-species biological research. Other planets began to re-examine their own ritual laws, questioning traditions that had gone unchallenged for generations. 1 year later, Jason and Yalara stood on the balcony of the royal palace, overlooking the Symbiotic Festival, an annual celebration marking their successful biounity. Before them bloomed the symbiosis bloom, a hybrid plant species combining Earth and Allori organisms, a living symbol of their miraculous integration. Below, outsiders and Allori mingled in a sea of music and light, no longer segregated by species, but united in a dance celebrating love and connection. Jason and Yalara exchanged tender glances, holding hands as they prepared to join the crowd. Beside them, other cross-species couples, including some who had once criticized their union, danced with shoulders touching. The camera panned to the sky arch, where a banner fluttered, Haloria, where all hearts beat as one. The story concluded, but a new era for the Five-Star Alliance had just begun. In the years that followed, Jason and Yalara's union became a template for intercultural diplomacy throughout the Alliance. The biounity rite evolved, incorporating flexibility for biological differences while maintaining its sacred core, the principle that true connection transcends physical form. The pheromone thread they had used during their ceremony was enshrined in the Royal Museum, a testament to how ancient traditions could adapt to embrace new realities. Young Allori studied the story of the human engineer and the princess, who had dared to challenge conventions. Dr. Marina Shu published a comprehensive guide to cross-cultural intimacy protocols, preventing others from stumbling into the same misunderstandings that had nearly cost Jason his freedom. The guide became standard reading for all humans assigned to alien worlds. Turhan, recognized for his pivotal role in facilitating understanding, was appointed High Scholar of Intercultural Relations, a new position created to ensure that cultural differences were approached with wisdom rather than rigidity. Even Duke Rayler, once the fiercest opponent of the Union, gradually softened his stance. After witnessing the prosperity and harmony that followed the historic biounity, he became an advocate for controlled cultural exchange, though he maintained that traditions should evolve thoughtfully rather than be discarded hastily. The most profound change came in the form of a new generation. 5 years after their union, Jason and Yalara welcomed a child, a biological impossibility made reality through advanced genetic engineering. Their daughter, with luminescent skin and human eyes, became a living symbol of what could be achieved when different species approached each other with open hearts and minds. As for the infamous law against pulling out during Allori rituals, it remained on the books but was reinterpreted. Rather than a rigid prohibition, it came to represent a deeper principle, that meaningful connections, whether personal, cultural, or diplomatic, required full commitment and follow-through. Jason never returned to his original role as a simple environmental engineer. Instead, he became a specialist in creating spaces where different species could coexist comfortably, designing environments that accommodated diverse biological needs while fostering interaction. Yalara, when she eventually ascended to the throne, ruled with a perspective broadened by her experiences. Under her guidance, Heloria transformed from a tradition-bound society to a progressive center of innovation, while still honoring the core values that had sustained Elori culture for millennia. Their story, which began with a cultural misunderstanding and the words, "Wait, human, you weren't supposed to pull out, it's illegal here," became a cornerstone of Five-Star Alliance history, taught to diplomatic cadets as a prime example of how apparent obstacles could become opportunities for greater understanding. On the 10th anniversary of their union, as thousands gathered for the Symbiotic Festival, Jason and Yalara renewed their vows under the Arch of Joined Heartbeats, a ceremonial structure that symbolized their continued commitment to bridging worlds. "We are not just two individuals who found love across the stars," Yalara told the assembled crowd, her luminescence radiant with emotion. "We are proof that the universe's greatest strength lies in its diversity, in the beautiful patterns that emerge when different rhythms find harmony." Jason, now fluent in Elori, responded with the traditional words of the Bio-Unity Rite, but with a meaningful addition: two hearts, two worlds, one rhythm, and infinite possibilities. As they sealed their renewal with a kiss, the symbiosis bloom released its spores for the first time, a botanical phenomenon scientists had thought impossible. The luminescent particles drifted across Heloria, each one carrying genetic material that would allow Earth plants to flourish in Elori soil and Elori flora to adapt to Earth conditions. It was, many agreed, a perfect metaphor for what Jason and Yalara had achieved. Not just coexistence, but true integration, where differences became strengths and boundaries faded into opportunities. And somewhere in the crowd, an Earth diplomat nervously held hands with an Elori scholar, wondering if perhaps they too might someday dance under the Arch of Joined Heartbeats, adding their own rhythm to the expanding symphony of interspecies harmony. The journey that had begun with a cultural faux pas had transformed into a revolution of understanding, proof that even the most rigid traditions could bend without breaking, and that love, in all its forms, remained the most powerful force in the universe. As night fell on Heloria, the station's bioluminescent gardens pulsed with a new pattern, one that matched the synchronized heartbeats of the diverse couples dancing beneath the stars. It was a living reminder that sometimes the most profound connections begin with the most awkward misunderstandings. And in the privacy of their chambers, Jason whispered to Yalara, "To think, all of this happened because I didn't understand one cultural rule." She laughed, her luminescence flickering with mirth. "Perhaps the universe knew what it was doing after all." "Next time," he teased, "maybe provide a more detailed cultural briefing before inviting someone to a BioLink preview." "Next time?" Her eyebrow ridge raised in amusement. "Planning to start a diplomatic incident with another princess?" "One interstellar cultural revolution is enough for one lifetime," Jason replied, drawing her close. "Besides, no one could ever shine as brightly as you." As they embraced, their heartbeats synchronized automatically, a biological miracle that had become second nature. Outside their window, the stars of the Five-Star Alliance twinkled against the void, each one representing a world forever changed by their unlikely love story. On Earth, the story of the engineer and the alien princess had become something of a legend, romanticized in holovids and studied in cultural relations courses. Few knew the full truth of those tense days when the fate of two individuals had hung in the balance, when a single biological rhythm had determined the course of interstellar diplomacy. But on Heloria, they remembered, And each year, when the Symbiotic Festival began, the first toast was always the same. To differences that unite us, to boundaries that guide us, to love that transforms us. It was, after all, a reminder that sometimes the most profound connections begin with a simple misunderstanding and the courage to learn from it.